Well, thank you to those of you who've been able to join us today. Really delighted to have you with us and our guest speaker, Adrian Rogers, who's CEO at the Chiltern Learning Trust. Just a very quick introduction from me. Hello, I am Caroline Doherty and I'm Head of Education Strategy at the Key. And I'm really delighted to be involved in this Trust in the Spotlight series of conversations that we're going to be having over the next few months with Trust CEOs about the realities of growing, expanding, scaling your work, and really getting into the nitty-gritty of what they have found works and doesn't work. So really interested in colleagues' comments and thoughts and suggestions as we're joining, having this session today. Please feel free to put any kind of remarks or information about yourself in the chat. And if you've got a specific question for Adrian, if you could pop that in the Q&A, that makes it a lot easier for us to sort of hoik it out and make sure that it gets answered. But really great to hear about other people's experiences and what stage you're at. As the slide makes very clear, the session is being recorded, so if you have to drop off or if colleagues aren't able to join today, the recording will be available. You can't be seen, which is I always find a benefit in these scenarios myself. But you can't. But you'll be able to obviously hear us, and we'll be able to see your comments. So do please feel free to keep them coming thick and fast in the chat. And as I've explained, we'll use the chat and the Q&A in the way that I've described. So without too much more ado, I'm going to hand over to Adrian, who's going to talk a little bit about the history and development of his trust, and then we'll go into some question and answers. Okay, over to you, Adrian. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, and welcome, colleagues. It's lovely to be asked to be here with the Key. Hopefully we'll provide a little bit of a welcome distraction from COVID and from testing and from rediscovery curriculums this morning, something slightly different. I'm going to go through quite transparently and honestly mistakes that we've made, successes that I think we've had along the way. If it helps any of you, then absolutely brilliant. The slides are there for you to see afterwards from the Key, which is great. And if you want to email me or Twitter me after this session, absolutely fine. I'm going to take you a little bit of a journey backwards, if that's okay, so chronologically. But this is our trust as it stands at the moment. We have 11 schools in Bedfordshire. We only stay in Bedfordshire, which we'll talk about in a moment. We have a training group, and we have 2 teaching schools, and also I'll talk about the teaching schools later because they've converted into 2 successful teaching school hubs. So that's been really interesting in terms of growth the last couple of weeks. I've been at the Trust 5.5 years. When I joined, there were 3 schools, Chorley Boys, Denby, 2 truly outstanding secondary schools, and Dallow Primary, a grade 4 sponsorship school. I was employed to grow the Trust. Prior to this, I've been a head for 14 years, and I'd set up a trust and had left there as executive head and moved just down the road in Bedfordshire down to Chiltern. So I've been there 5.5 years. And we've got sort of 3 stages of the journey in terms of growth and in terms of numbers, as well as ethos. So what I'm going to talk you through today is our first bit of the journey, which is 3 to 6 schools in 2015 to 17. Then we'll look at the growth from 6 to 10, and that challenges that board, which was between 17 and 18. And then actually we took a deliberate period of consolidation in 2018 and changed our growth strategy, which we'll talk about. And we stayed at 10. We have taken on 1 in the meantime. But actually this summer, we've decided the time is right, and it appears that we will be taking 4 schools into the Trust, and we're excited about that, moving to 15 schools in the summer, we hope, and the 2 teacher school hubs. Our aspiration that we'll look at in a moment is to be excellent. I've deliberately put it up like this because our schools are very different and their badges are very different. We are not Chiltern 1, Chiltern 2, Chiltern 3, Chiltern, except for in Chiltern Academy, our free school doesn't appear in the name. The schools are very different places and they have different cultures and different ethos, but the common culture is that we are highly aspirational, and we try to do things very well. Thanks, Helena. If you could just pop it along. So that passionate and unrelenting drive is something that we're proud of. It may appear as a cliche, and you'll all have vision statements that are as good as or better than that, perhaps. But we do think that incessant nature of our work and that relentlessness and move to excellence in our mission is what sets us out, and that's our USP, so to speak. So we're quite happy with the schools making their own curriculum decisions as long as they're achieving very, very well. There you can have it in terms of secondary, middle, primary. We are still in a 3-tier system at parts of Bedfordshire. So our secondaries and our middles are deemed, they're all deemed secondary, but of different age range. We have 5 outstandings, 4 goods. The 2 requires improvement haven't been inspected since joining the trust. So, you know, we're a reasonably successful local mat. We're not perfect. We make many mistakes, as we all do. Our GCSE performance is very high in terms of Progress 8. And so that makes us extremely popular in terms of parental perception. The next 2 or 3 things, I'm sorry, they're not meant as boastful. They're meant to show that actually they're really important to our sustainability. And that's we have a CTG, an initial teacher training, and we train just under 100 students this year. That's a little bit of an increase from last year, and it'll probably be over 100 next year, probably perhaps due to COVID. But we do train our own, and that makes us highly sustainable. And we do have 2 teaching schools, and some of you may have seen our EduChat series, which I'm sure it's nowhere near as good as the Keys, Caroline, but it was super over lockdown 1, and we had a lovely response from educators across the planet who spoke for free every day to keep some of us sane and to keep CPD and leadership on the agenda at a time when we were somewhat distracted and going through difficult times. So that EduChat series is really successful and important to us moving forwards. The trust is financially sustainable in terms of 7.9 million. I'll try not to take too many questions off the chat, but our 7.9 million in uncommitted reserves, our turnover is about 55 million at the moment, in terms of putting that into percentage for William that just popped onto the screen. Okay, right, thanks, Helena. Our vision translates to, we think these are the things that our vision translates to. Pupil performance, we make no apologies for focusing highly on that. Some of our areas, not all of our schools, but some are in areas of very high social deprivation, and we can be as beautiful and community orientated as we wish to be, and we do. We very strongly believe in communities, you can see from point 3, but our children need results to get into 6th form, and they need results to get into university, and that social change won't come unless we give high pupil performance a priority. So, you know, we're really proud of our GCSE performance and our Progress 8 figures, because we want our children to get the best deal from our schools. We have actually almost an 80s/90s model of leadership now that I'm getting to that age in terms of from our headships. We want heads in our schools that relate to their staff and relate to their pupils. We have financial and operational experts, and we don't take away autonomy from their heads, but we want them doing what they do best, teaching and learning and leading staff, pupils and parents with their vision. Positive relations we talked about. We do an awful lot of community work. We want to be an integral part of the community. We serve Luton community, a Leighton Buzzard community in Bedfordshire, a Dunstall community, and we're just moving to Bedford. And they all represent different challenges, and we're more successful in some than others, which is interesting and perhaps a different story. But we do believe strongly in community. Recruitment, we think, is absolutely key to that, and our CTG helps that. And our local reputation is helping us get more and more leaders of very high quality into the trust. And that striving to do better is something that we think is important and actually should run through the organisation, even if curriculums are different. Okay, if the schools do all of the above well, then we do value individuality. Okay, thanks, Hannah. I'm not going to go through these too much. We won't dwell on them, but it is important when you're growing your trust to be able to prove to success and point to things that you can add to that school. I spoke to a chair of governors 2 days ago, and the first line is, if you do not think Chiltern Learning Trust will make the education of your children better, please end the Zoom call now. Because that's got to be, it's not about joining us because of the reserves, although 1 or 2 schools do phone for that. It's about if we can make those life chances better, and those children get a better education by joining Chiltern Learning Trust. And we've had some really good success stories, but in terms of growth from that, and I think the key message that I would want to get across in terms of, because lots of people, lots of CEOs on this call will hopefully be able to point to similar successes to some of those. I think that there's 2 things about those successes. It's getting through with your board, and I think your trustees are really important in your growth journey. And we remind our trustees, ironically, of these successes. When we look at whether we're ready to take schools on, I think what we really look at is whether we have capacity givers and capacity takers in the trust. And I think that's a really key point. And when we were planning for the session, and Caroline just picked me up as a point of interest, well, why did you stall? Why did you move on? And perhaps we'll pick that up at the end. But I think it's really important that you look at your schools in terms of capacity givers and capacity takers. Of our 11, hand on heart, 9 now give capacity to the system-led leadership. 1 is neither giver or taker, and 1 still takes, and that's the newest school to us. But I do think it's important that your board, and boards can be categorized into 2 extremes, really. You can have a very carefree board that just want to grow for the sake of it, and I don't agree with that at all. We often say no to schools. And then you will have a highly aspirational board, which I think actually Chiltern's board fits in, and they want them all fixed before we grow. So, the challenge was to us 2 weeks ago, well, Adrian, you've still got 2 grade 3 schools. We're going to another 4. We'd rather have them all be outstanding before you go, but we will take your decision on that. And that's a really good position to be in, but it is a challenge, and that's why we go back as a central team to let's look at the capacity givers, trustees. We can't make every school perfect. Even our grade 1 schools have got no end of challenges, same as your schools have. But sometimes the grade 1 schools will have more challenges than the grade 3. So, okay, thanks, Helena. So this is the 2021 situation. We've got potential growth that we've talked about with 2 secondary, 2 primary potentially joining. We have the award of the 2 teaching school hubs, which again we will probably treat in the same way as we perhaps have 2 schools joining us. It's probably making the same challenges. In the last 2 weeks, it's pulled me into more direction than any of our 11 schools have. But then again, having 9 capacity givers, I feel we can cope with that. We do need to grow our central team, and as you grow, and I'll show that in a diagram quickly in a moment, HR, operations and school improvement are all important. William, again, that's great. TSH is Teaching School Hub. I apologise, everyone's slipping into jargon straight away. It is a brand new one, William. Please, you won't be alone on the call. TSH entered our new world 2 or 3 weeks ago when they announced the new 80 Teaching School Hubs, and they're doing away with the 700. Okay, and I'll come back to that, William, rather than answer the next one about Teaching School Hub. But that is a good question. But as you probably all know, teaching schools as they stand are going in July, and they're being replaced by 80 across the country. 4 trusts, and we're one of them. I picked up a couple. Okay, at a second site, new build for our largest secondary may probably be going ahead. And we have got new build projects. We've got a brand new secondary, a brand new build for one of our secondary schools that's 3 months from completion, and that takes away capacity from a quarter of our staff. Okay, A good question just before we move on that has come up, Caroline. What are the numbers of students? How many children in total? Across the 11 schools, because we've got secondary, obviously it's quite a large trust. It's just under 9,000 pupils at the moment, and with the 4 new schools, it would move to 12,000 pupils. Okay, but there's just under 9,000 in Chiltern being educated in Chiltern today. Okay, next please, Hannah. I'm just going to whiz through the next 3, but you are welcome to have them. So you've got, this is what I call the 10 school model or 11 school model. That's as we stand today. There's been 1 or 2 slight changes since January, as you'd expect with any large organisation. Some of those are part-time. So, you know, if you look at there and think, wow, they get a lot. We only charge 3%, where, you know, we're very low, low percentage top slice. But some of those are part-time. 1 or 2 are still shared with the people. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's deliberately done so you can't read it, Louisa, but you can have the slides. But there you can see the 4 areas are the colours. The red is operations, the green is finance, the yellow is school improvement, and the blue is initial teacher training and professional development. And we organise that into 4 strands. David Carter was kind enough on his last day as National School Commissioner to put that diagram out and say, this is the clearest I've ever seen central teams represented. So thank you, David. That's the biggest compliment of my career. Okay, and Rosalind, I have said, but it's 3% for that. And the 3% basically buys you that, plus challenge partners and school improvement. We keep a school improvement pot. Okay, Helena, if you want to whiz through. The next 2 are really quick. That's actually our 6th school model of 3 years ago, and you can see it's slightly less. You can see it's smaller, but we still have the 4 defined areas at 6 schools. By that time, we've moved to the defined areas. And then if you move to the next one, Helena, please. Now that is the one that I walked into, and it's not a criticism. You know, it was great. It was a different PA at the top actually than Emma, but that was what I walked into at on September the 1st, 2015, with 3 schools. And hopefully you can read that at the top, but that was 2,500 pupils, 2 secondary, 1 primary. And I don't mind saying, because you won't be able to work it out, but that cost £420,000 to run the central team salaries. And that is my approximate startup fee, always 400 to 500,000 to put in a reasonable central team with a okay paid CEO, obviously not silly money, and that operating the 3 schools. The current wage bill for the 2 slides back is just over £1 million now, which represents the 3%. Okay, so
it's really helpful to get a sense of these things in real terms.
Yeah. So I think what's important, Caroline and colleagues, is that, you know, the economy of scale now, you know, my cost per pupil, because we've got 9,000 pupil, is now £18 per pupil, whereas it was probably very different when we were 3 schools. Even though my salary's gone up, you know, just a tiny amount, which is fine. But if you look at that, therefore, in terms of cost effectiveness, and that's the problem with small mats. Now, I would suspect that a lot of people here are, you know, at small mats when they want to grow their mat. And I have conversations often with people in that position that are 4 or 5 years behind us, and they've got a real good product to sell, but it's economics and it's finance and it's value for money. You know, for double the price, we're now running 11 schools, of which 8 are deemed secondary, and yet 5 years ago we were running 3 schools. You know, so that's been really, and again, when the others join, then obviously it'll be even better value. Okay, thanks, Eleanor.
Fantastic. Sorry, I was just going to say thank you so much for all the questions coming through. We will definitely get through those and also do keep them coming. Adrian, was there anything that you wanted to say just then when I cut you off?
No, there was one last slide that I don't know if Eleanor was putting on at the end, which I'm happy to talk about, but I do it's very cathartic and very professional, but I list all the mistakes that we've made.
Well, let's talk about that then.
You want me to talk about the mistakes, folks? Yeah. Okay. I think it's a common one. Again, David Carter would say, "Oh, thank you, and don't promise the earth to get schools in." It's very easy to slip into, "Oh no, we'll leave you alone. You're a super school. You're going to be a capacity giver immediately." It's very easy to do that, and I think every CEO, especially 5 years ago, and especially you people, if you've got 2 or 3 schools in your trust, it's very easy to go out and make a deal, and it just backfires. You know, I know 2 or 3 trusts locally that have gone out and set up quite recently, and their CEOs are telling me, or their executive heads are telling me this straight away, and it's, don't promise the earth. You are, as a CEO, going to be their boss, and there's no way around that. It's going to be a different world. There will be some loss of autonomy. It's whether it's acceptable to that school joining you. Don't pretend you're going to leave them alone. Good and outstanding schools, their HR and finance are just as likely to be in a bit of a pickle as anyone else is. Just because they're good at teaching and learning doesn't mean they're great at the other rounding bits of looking after their business. Chairs and governors, not in this trust, but in my last trust, they went very rogue. You've got to keep them very close. They've always got to be like your own chair of governors is when you were ahead. And they will phone me as much as they will the head about strategic things, about the cost of the trust. I have half-termly-ish meetings with them. And it's not behind the head's back. Often the head will be there. But they will phone me about advice over stuff, and that's absolutely fine. Then don't take on more than 2 schools per term unless your finance team are too soft and too gentle. If they're anything like mine, and my finance team are brilliant, but they tell me if I take on 2 schools per term, you know, I don't think I would reach my next birthday, Caroline, if I did it again. Act quickly. If a head isn't joining, isn't good enough, we don't sack heads. We don't do that model, even when we take on grade 4 schools. But we give them short time, and it's about getting that balance and being humane, giving them. Sometimes they've turned the corner with support, and they just welcome support. And if they listen, great. Some don't listen, and then it is important that you act quickly, else the school takes longer to turn around. Sit on deputy heads, assistant head appointment panels. Once or twice we didn't do that in the first day or 2 of them joining, and that was a mistake. And do share your best staffing immediately. So if somebody comes second for a science interview, send them to the school down the road that needs a science teacher. It's a very, very quick win. Do that. We've done that with the 4 schools before they've even joined us, because that's a huge win. You win hearts and minds immediately because you're helping with recruitment. So those are the mistakes. I think of those 2 key ones, it's number 1 and 3. You know, if you don't keep that chair of governors close and they're not on the side of the trust, you're in for a very difficult ride, ethos and vision and direction wise. Okay, right. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting there also your first point about kind of promising the earth and recognizing that we're kind of, you know, no one can tell the future. We're feeling that especially acutely now, and wanting to sort of make promises about how the future will be better and the additionality that a trust will bring. If you don't have a key sense of how you're actually going to deliver that, it's a trap that you could easily fall into unwittingly. So we're going to run through some of the other questions that have come in. You mentioned, as you were going through your slides, kind of work with the communities, and we've had a question about what sort of projects do you work on with the communities, and I'm also interested a little bit in that kind of trust joining, you know, schools joining a trust process and how you kind of kept communities and parents on side.
There's one good thing of a mistake, and something that we did recently, Caroline, in terms of community, and especially during COVID. We did it because the school we took on was in a little mess PR-wise, and so many things had gone off on at the school. And actually, we took on their social media for them, and we took on their comms for them. I would probably have comms shared with any new school that joins us, or any school that joins, share it between the share it between the trust and the schools, the social media and the messages, because then you're getting out positive trust messages immediately. And it's only the same as if a head and deputy don't get on, Caroline. That's the best analogy I use. If a head and deputy don't get on, the school never moves forward at the right pace. If the trust and school isn't on the same page from day one, you don't move forward. We've had that happen. So actually taking control of the narrative is really, really important and really good advice. And I would do that again. Even if we took a grade 1 school on, I would have our marketing team or our social media team work alongside theirs. So I'm really sorry, it's a really trivial example, but we did loads of work 2 summers ago when a couple of schools had joined us. One of them, we picked up the social media, and one of them we didn't. One of them, the school quite rightly and proudly said, we've got lots of new build taking place. Didn't mention the trust once, even though we'd won the bid for them and we managed it centrally. The other school, where we managed the social media, we put out a thank you, we put out a picture of the school and the trust estates team that had done the actual work out, and all the parents are putting, oh, thank you, Chiltern, brilliant, great to see Chiltern winning some bids for us. The other school, the parents didn't know the trust were involved at all. And that's fascinating to see the difference in the narrative, therefore. But in terms of community, we just throw ourselves into everything. We send a member of our senior team to every invite we get. We share the community things about, we go to, I know it's COVID now, but we go to all charity events, especially in Luton where we are based. We will go to lots of things. We will turn up in a way that, outstanding head teachers do. We'll share it amongst our senior team. And so therefore we get into those communities straight away. We'll never say no. If a charity asks us to attend an event, one of us will go, Caroline, and I think that makes a big difference to the community.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
And your kind of thoughts about growth, as you mentioned, you're about to enter another period of growth, having had a bit of a consolidation period. How big is too big, or how big are you planning to go?
I mean, one thing that I haven't mentioned, Caroline, is having a good growth strategy and having it written down. I blatantly plagiarised ours from Reach 2. And I went and saw Steve at Reach 2. So if anyone from Reach 2 is watching, I apologise, but Steve said I could use it. And we've used it for the last 6 years. So we know when we're going to when schools approach us, and schools do approach a lot because of the brand and we think we've got something to offer. So therefore, and someone's talked about the operational model, we have a growth plan, which again, if somebody emails across, I'll send you across, and we talk about the pros and cons, and we look at the operational model. So it'll be highly operational in terms of if we grow to what size, what staff would we need. So we've got that written down. That was written in 2018. Now we then deliberately went 0 to 2 each year. So we left it loose that we could grow, but actually we didn't really want to. So criteria when I first started was you grow to 6 schools in 2 years. We did that. But now the criteria was 0 to 2 per year. We've only taken on 1. But then we've got to 2021, which is the last day of this to be done. And we haven't then grown. So we therefore felt we had capacity. If we'd have taken 2 schools a year, Caroline, for the last 3 years, we wouldn't have had room to grow. To answer the question, though, I'm sorry this sounds really simplistic. I know all the middle leaders, and I know their wives' names, and I know their children, and we're a very personable trust. I go and I travel, even in COVID, into the schools, and so do my team. We don't sit in a central office. We share the central office across all our schools. So the school improvement team for education are based at Chiltern Boys. The operations are based at Chiltern Academy, etc., etc. I'm based in Denver with the finance team. So therefore, we go out into our schools every day. And what we do, therefore, is create that we're everywhere. And we want to know, we have contacts. So someone put, how big is big enough? If I wanted to open 25 schools, I could have done that 4 years ago. And that's not what we want. Do I think we'll be 20 schools if I had a crystal ball in 5 years' time? Probably. I would suspect 15 in September, and then followed by perhaps a small period of consolidation. Growth for growth's sake. We often say, it's not how big you are, it's how good you are. And that's what we're after. What would be the point of having 20 schools and then they all get RI at the next inspection and you give the kids and the parents a bad deal?
Yeah.
So I mean, the sweet spot seems to be, by the research, showing 15 to 20 is a good size for school improvement, Caroline, and I think that's probably what we're looking to.
Just moving on to governance now, we've had quite a few questions about, how did your governance structure change as you grew? What are the kind of local governance arrangements that you have, and how have you gotten people bought into them?
We have governing bodies that are quite closely reflect their old governing body. So therefore, governors, obviously we've got the members, same as everyone on the call, and we've got trustees, complete separation between the two, and then we've got governing bodies. We have full governing bodies, which is great. We give them responsibilities, so they're not a pseudo governing body, they're called governing bodies. We have no intention to change that. They're not an academy council, and we make sure that they are in line because we have very firm templates, Caroline. So so the templates, so that although they're all unique to the schools, we actually talk about those templates annually, and on the same night each of our 11 heads will be presenting the same information, unique to their school, yes, but that will be presenting safeguarding information or school improvement information or attendance or post-COVID recovery, etc., etc. So we have quite a tight structure, even though they then do them themselves. We tend to leave the chair in. There's not millions of people wanting to volunteer to be chair, but we win hearts and minds by then I become close to the chair, and we have structures for that, but also a member of the senior team sits as an advisory member on every governing body. So I do 2, my head of education does 2, my head of finance does 2. We choose it and we stay with them for the whole year. So we don't become a governor, we don't vote, but we do sit there and help and stop schools going rogue or advise schools as they move forwards. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's great. We've also had quite a few questions about your kind of central charge, whether that has changed over time or if it's always been 3%, and what your thoughts are on the least nice phrase in education, gag pooling.
Yeah. I mean, we don't pull the gags yet. I'm not saying we're going to imminently, but we don't. We have discussed it 3 days ago. We don't pull gag. We do pull reserves. The schools keep up to 5% of their carry forward for themselves, for their spend. The rest is pooled. So all the reserves are held centrally. Any expenditure outside of the budget over 10,000 has to be approved by the Director of Finance. The budgets are set by the head teacher and by the governing bodies. So budgets lie with them. We're quite devolved with that. Yeah. Unless they go over spend, then I don't step in. If it looks like they're going to set a deficit budget, the finance director and I go and work with them. They have very strict KPIs in terms of, it's not quite Outward Grange, and lots of you will have seen the Outward Grange, model, but we have very similar in terms of percentage deployment and percentage spend on staffing, at 80% of GAG on staffing. We try and keep them to that. If they can't keep to, we go in and do our best to work alongside the head, that's the finance director and myself, and give them advice and support. If then we've done that and we've worked alongside them and we still can't make the budgets balance because of whatever reasons, we allow them to set the deficit budget. If they do anything unauthorised, we do have the right to take financial delegation off them. We haven't ever done that yet.
And just thinking about it, it's really helpful, as I say, to see your model and the folk within it change. Sort of what was your centralisation journey around things like finance, HR, payroll? At what point did that happen? Did you still have school business managers in each school? And when you're doing those that period of consolidation, what was going on with regard to some of those things?
Yeah, Finance immediately, folks, in terms of centralisation of finance. Although there's still a low-level finance officer in each school, the finance director went in from day one before I started. The trust started 2 years before I started, and so the finance has always been very centralised. HR, the schools buy their own in, but they have to use the same one. So Luton Borough Council, which are very good HR providers, but they come through us. So we have a finance and personnel manager. So they come through them, they support the head teacher, and then they go to that. Payroll has always been centralised. So there were a list of things, Caroline, that when they come, that they know they set up certain contracts that they have to do. Schools can't come in and say, we're not taking part in your finance model. No, tough. You will all bank at HSBC or you'll all bank at NatWest. How you use your funds, up to you, but you must have the same system. Payroll, finance, always been centralised. HR, fairly centralised. School business managers, yes, we tend to have, but they tend to overlook the operations rather than the finance. We don't need a school business manager overlooking the finance. William's just put something on about harmonisation of the processes. There's two methods to do it, really, folks. You can either do it what most of us do, which is work with what you've got, go through the tutoring process, work with what you've got, and then restructure after a while, or you look at it as an opportunity before you even join the trust, and you look at those savings to be made. Some of our business managers have subtly moved across to do more operations and less finance, if that makes sense, folks. But the 3%, Caroline, which I've sort of avoided saying, no, it's always been 3%. We spend within it. One of the reasons we can do that, really, is that some of our schools did hold big reserves when they joined the trust, and they were the founding two schools. So therefore, you know, we don't need big trust central reserves to do a project, and therefore the schools keep the 3%. Give us the 3%, or we give them 97 is a better way of looking at it, CEOs. Someone told me that from, I think, Deloitte, always say that, no, we give you 97, and you know, you do that job with that. It's a very different way of looking at it. But yeah, I'm happy to take the next one.
And do you quick question, do you have a trust sort of shared services brochure that explains this, that you give to new schools?
Yeah, it's similar to this, and it's called Information for Potential Joiners. You know, so I know some schools charge 6, 7, 8%, some trusts, and they say, oh, but we pay for all your finance and all your HR, you know, or we're charging 3%. But so we carry forward zero balance in our trust. We spend it on challenge partners, 75 grand on school improvement a year that we give to our Director of Education, to buy the SLEs that are internal, etc., and paying for challenge partners, and our health and safety audits, and the rest is just on wages. We don't carry forward anything centrally.
And just a question on sort of, you obviously got mixed phase there in the map. Someone asked a question that, you know, they're in a trust with small primary schools, and obviously, as you've just mentioned there, big reserves in some of those secondary schools that you're working with in a sort of jumpstart in terms of capacity. Have you got any advice for somebody that is more in the primary end of things? And also, have you moved staff across primary and secondary, and how has that been? Okay,
we do move some staff across primary and secondary, not massively. We don't move staff massively, full stop. We have got SLE models, whereby we've got about 20 SLEs that we pay centrally a day a week of their time. They're then, for want of a better term, sold out to other schools outside of the trust or work within the trust. And that is a big financial burden that we think pays off. And some of those do go between primary and secondary. Not much, but they do a little. And they teach for 4 days and then work centrally for a day a week. We do move them a little. Primary, I think, is slightly different model. I think you're right, folks. They don't want the 4-1 model that we call it, 4 days in teaching and 1 out, because they don't want their primary teacher quite rightly out of school. Also, of course, if you're a large primary, Matt, and I apologise, you just haven't got the same level of income with large secondary schools. So therefore, you have to be much more creative. And I was talking to somebody who's a primary CEO last week, and they talked to me about the really inventive ways that they've looked at cross-school subject leadership. They don't pay them at all, but they have a great people want to do for their professional development. Now, whether that's right or wrong, it's still a great model of getting collaboration and buy-in to that trust. But yeah, I don't think it's massively different, but it is easier to have that collaboration a little bit in terms of staffing in secondary, because you've got a timetable. It's much more difficult than just the pragmatics of primary. What we tend to do with primary, Caroline, and anyone that's interested, we have a director of English and Maths that are 50% working for the trust, 50% teaching. So therefore, we do have two people, and if they have to go in and help with teaching and learning, so be it. If they have to go out and help with the humanities, so be it. But we go that model rather than SLEs.
Okay, and we've some more questions about kind of what you've consolidated and rolled out across schools. So, assessment, curriculum, how aligned is the approach there?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I saw Andy's question. More aligned, and if you look at the continuum of centralisation, which I won't name the trust, but you could all name online, through to laissez-faire, we're in the middle. But actually, the best trusts, in my opinion, have it bottom up, driving it close to centralisation. So now we don't, for example, have joint across our secondaries. We don't have joint exam boards. Now, actually, many departments are asking us that they want to move to that. That's fine. Yeah. So the more you can get bottom up, our pastoral leads all meet monthly. We don't make them; they choose to do that because it's good practice and they can share ideas. So curriculum and assessment, a little bit. We do assessment points identically, Andy, across the whole trust. So we do take data in 3 times a year at the same point, and we do at primary level, for example, we just moved to exactly the same tests. So we're comparing like with like. We moved to that 2 years ago. So primary actually, although we've got less primaries, is more developed in terms of centralisation of curriculum and assessment. But that came at their request again, Caroline. It wasn't from the CEO saying you must do this. And similarly, we're moving along that way. We do have subject groups that meet termly, and they are actually moving across to centralisation of their own free will. Okay.
And one final area that we've had a question about is IT.
Yeah. So Fred has just put in a lovely question about single technology platform. Yes, we're a Google school. We just use Google for everything. And we've got a couple of ed tech schools, and we use them to roll out Google as well in our trust and across the country. Yeah, we did centralise, Malcolm, it's a good question. We centralised and harmonised IT. In terms of that, back to that other question as well, catering, we moved to centralised contract 2 years ago when we got to 10 schools, 2.5 years ago. Catering, cleaning and ICT, those 3 we moved to 2.5 years ago. We have a central ICT contract. We went out for it. We do have an ICT manager that manages that contract, and we do have a contracts manager that manages the other 2 contracts. But it now means the heads can still complain about the catering and the cleaning, but they can complain through the trust central team, who will then sort it. Fred's question about PFI and catering is difficult. Yeah, it's not insurmountable though, Fred. We got around it with 2 of our PFI schools.
Okay, wow, the questions have come thick and fast. Goodness me. Wow, thank you all. I think we've had some clear asks for, as we said, we can send out the slides. Your growth plan, Adrian, people seem very interested in also your scheme of delegation. So would it be possible to share those?
So yeah, growth plan.
And the scheme of delegation, we'll get those out to folk as well. And the information that you send to new schools, a quick request for that. Thank you, Louisa. Yeah, fantastic. And of course, if you do want to talk to us further at the Key, you can find out more about what we're doing to support trusts at the web address there, or you can email us at partnerships@thekeysupport.com. But thank you all for giving up your time at lunchtime to join us, and thank you, Adrian, for dealing with that barrage of questions. But great to have such an engaged audience. Brilliant stuff, and hopefully everyone planning exciting expansion in the future. Is there anything you wanted to say, Adrian?
Well, one, thank you, colleagues, because I'm absolutely knackered. But secondly, Caroline, I don't know, I mean, there's some lovely questions on there. Does the technology enable me to just answer them very quickly in the next 10 minutes and them to stay on there, or not? Does the technology not do that?
We will see what we can do about that.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to answer. Some great questions there. I'm quite happy to answer, but obviously I just don't want them to be wasted.
Fantastic. We'll work out a way to do that in follow-up. And thank you very much, colleagues, for your questions and your engagement. And have a great day, rest of day. Bye-bye.